Welcome to a championship, a three-time championship edition of Inside the Zone. He's Blake Sebring, I'm Glenn Marini, and as you know, the Komets winning their third straight Turner Cup title this past weekend. And Blake, you take a look at it. When you take a look at the entire specter of work in the last 3 years, what do you most take away from this run by the Komets?
Well, the thing that always struck me the most is how they won the important road games. I mean, how many times were they facing elimination on the road and the opposing team had a sellout crowd ready to just tear them apart, and they could be tied or even behind in the third period and they still found ways to win. I mean, to me, that's why they are a championship team. It's not the 10,000 fans that helps. It's not the way they're treated here that helps, but it's the way those guys always seem to be able to pull off huge wins on the road.
When you talk a little bit about it, you take a look at the core of the team over the last 3 years, the Guy Dupuis, the Colin Chucks, the PC Druins. They seem to be able, like you said, to step up when the stage is at its biggest.
Well, they always play their best games. I mean, David Huckle is a playoff player. I mean, he's been fantastic, and especially because matchups become so critical in the playoffs. If you've got one guy on a team that you have to stop to win one game or to win a series, you just say, Huck, go do it, and it's over. And Kevin Bertram, I mean, who's been on the ice more at the end of more important one-goal games that they've led in the last 5 minutes of a game? Nobody. I mean, he's always the one out there, he and Guy or Danko now, and he's just, you know, you overlook some of those things, but those are the things that really make you a great championship team.
You know, a few years ago, you had the triple overtime game in Game 7 to win the first of the three. That was pure excitement. They were great throughout the entire season. Last year, you had a team that overcame injuries, missed a lot of games with injuries, and then were able to pull it out in the end. How do you characterize this year's championship run? I
think this year was more resiliency, you know, in that they knew everybody was going to give them their best shot. Everybody hates them. Everybody compares them to the Yankees and all that, and Flint was really matched up well with them. I mean, this championship was more about exhaustion than exhilaration. I mean, those guys were whipped after Game 5 Saturday night, and they were just gassed. And part of it was back-to-back games, but also because Flint played so hard and just laid everything out there. I mean, they didn't slow down a bit, and they just hit. And I think the Komets might have been in trouble if Flint had won this game, because the Komets were pretty exhausted. Yeah, when you take a look at this series, the Turner Cup Finals, what in your mind was key? Because special teams played a huge part, goaltending played a huge part. What in your mind were really sticking out to you? I got a couple things. I thought PC Druin was amazing. They scored, I think, 9 power play goals in the finals, and he assisted or scored on 8 of them, which is what you expect from PC. But what I was most amazed with was PC's defense. Somebody had to pick up the defensive mantle on each line, and you've got Huckle and you've got Chalk on the other 2 lines. Well, PC did it on that line. I mean, he was always back and always staying high and making sure there weren't any odd man rushes. I think this is the best that we in Fort Wayne have ever seen PC play. The other thing was, I thought Al Sims made a masterful move with the goaltending, starting Tim Hahn in Game 4 and the way he handled that whole situation, and then bringing Nick back for Game 5. Everybody was just completely comfortable with that whole situation, which could have exploded in their faces. And it also made my prediction come true that I said Timmy Hahn would play a big part in this series.
And he did. He got a big win up there on Friday night in Game 4, so certainly that set up things for Saturday. Did you see early in the first period on Saturday night kind of an expedience of this team? They didn't want to go back to Flint. As I mentioned, nothing against the people of Flint or Perani Arena. They didn't want to make another trip back up there. They want to finish it at home.
Well, they put so much into Friday's game to win that game. I mean, Friday's game might have been their best game of the playoffs. Yes, Flint came back to tie it 2-2, but the Komets came right back after that. And that was not a 6-2 game. That was more like a 4-2 game, the way it played out. And that was a fantastic game with that kind of crowd. That crowd was so rowdy. I mean, they were getting all over the Komets players in the penalty box and everywhere. It was just an electric atmosphere. It was a really fun game to watch. Just to be, you know, some of these old barns, they're just not the same unless they're full like that. And then they're completely different buildings. They're almost alive. And that's what that was like Friday night.
When you take a look at Ciro named the MVP, you look at the stats, you can't have a problem with it. He played great. But you and I both were like, I don't know, PC was definitely deserving also, and maybe even Nick Boucher.
Oh, how about Colin Chalk? How many key faceoffs did he win going head-to-head with an NHLer who won a Stanley Cup? You could look at that. Brandon Warner was fantastic in the playoffs. He was +9. He led the team. I bet nobody would have guessed that before the playoffs started. And him and Frankie together were just incredible. There was a lot of playoff possibilities for MVP. Kaylee Schrock didn't score a ton, but how many icings did he prevent with his hustle and things like that? There was a lot of key points in this series that could have been turning points in the series that somebody always stepped up. And it wasn't always just, the usual suspects. Everybody contributed. Justin Tredorik was all over the place in this series.
When you take a look back at the 3 years, as I mentioned before, the PCs, the Collins, the guys that have really made up the core of the team of the past 3 seasons, what do you think is the legacy they leave, and how are they viewed in the history of Komets hockey at this point?
Well, let's put it this way. Nobody has 4 rings other than Kevin Bertram and Colin Chalk and now Guy Dupuis and Al Sims. When you consider the 58 years of Komets hockey and all the great runs they had, nobody's won 3 in a row. And nobody has won the road games that this team has won over the last 3 years. When you're down 3-1 to Port Huron twice and have to come back, and when you face must-win games on the road in Kalamazoo and in Muskegon, and you have to come back and win, and they did every time. It's baffling how they were able to do that. Part of that is Nick Boucher in goal, or Tim Hahn this week. That's one thing the Komets do better than any other IHL team, is they always have 2 great goaltenders. And it's amazing to me that other IHL teams don't realize that and invest in 2 great goaltenders. They always outspend on one and try to do a rookie with the other, and the Komets have never done that. And you would think that more IHL teams would try to do that.
So, looking at the 58 years of Komets hockey, is this the golden era of Komets hockey?
They lost 72 games in 4 years. If you think about that, that is ridiculous. Only losing 72 games in 4 years. And if you go back and look at what their record is in 1-goal games during those 4 years, they're like 75-80% in 1-goal games. And that's not just home games either. That's road games too. They've won 20 games on the road every year. Nick Boucher is like 50 games over 500 on the road during his Komets career. It's just incredible how they, when the biggest moments, which are always on the road too. It's not home games don't win championships. It's road games that win championships, and they always step up.
I'm going to play devil's advocate here for a second, because you've always got the doubting Thomases and people. What do you say to the people that say, well, there's just 6 teams, or in this case, there's 7 teams in the league this year? What do you say to those people?
Well, everybody reveres, and they should, Eddie Long, Len Thornton, Lionel Repka, Chuck Adamson, Reggie Primo, all those guys. They are the legends of the Komets, and they earned every bit of that. They had 6 teams and 7 teams when they won in 63 and 65. People forget that. And if you look at the amount of minor league teams that has been lost over the last 10 years, there's probably 30, 35 fewer minor league teams. So the talent level would naturally, you would think would rise. And that's kind of, I think, why this is so interesting that the Komets have won 3 in a row. It's not happening in any other leagues either. I just think it's really interesting that they've won it in 3 different ways each time. Flint was the perfect matchup against them. We talked about before the series started how Flint would be a much tougher opponent for the Komets to face than Muskegon. They would have blown Muskegon out. But Flint, you had 4 1-goal games. And every one of those games could have come down to one key play, one mistake, and they still won.